So the scriptural precedent for Ash Wednesday is the use of ashes in really primarily symbolic, more so than liturgical ways, though there are some mentions of the use of ashes in the Old Testament in liturgical ways. Numbers 19, for example, in the ceremony of the red heifer, where ashes are used as a sign of purification. The use of ashes really does find its roots in a lot of Old Testament stories, where in several places it symbolizes really four things: mourning and grief, repentance, humility, and mortality. And you'll find this in several stories. Like, for example, in Esther, Mordecai tears his garments. He puts on sackcloth and ashes and walks through the city crying out in mourning when King Ahasuerus orders the killing of Jewish people in the Persian Empire. Or in the book of Job, after Job loses everything, he mourns that God has cast him into the mire and he has become like dust and ashes. And after God then puts Job in his place, at the end of the book of Job, Job repents in dust and ashes. Or in 2 Samuel, after being assaulted by her brother Amnon, Tamar mourns by tearing her garments and putting ashes on her head. And my favorite, actually, is Jonah. Jonah is a hilarious book, I find, and I love the story. Jonah delivers his famous and wildly successful 8-word sermon, 40 days more and Nineveh shall be overthrown. Jonah is the most successful preacher and prophet in history because everybody listened to him, which upset him. But the king of Nineveh covers himself in sackcloth and sits in ashes and orders the whole kingdom to fast and to put on sackcloth. Even the animals have to put on sackcloth in this story. There are also Old Testament examples of the themes of humility and mortality. So when Abraham dares to negotiate with God over the destruction of Sodom, he does so by humbly acknowledging his place as one who is but dust and ashes. And while we might think that phrase that we hear, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, is biblical, the actual quotation comes from the story of Adam and Eve's expulsion from the garden, when God tells Adam, "You are dust, and to dust you shall return." Similarly, Psalm 103 that we read during the Ash Wednesday liturgy famously reminds us that God remembers that we are but dust. And the rubrics do specifically say not to giggle when you hear that. So I'm just warning you, no giggling when you remember that you are but dust. While these references to ashes are much more common in the Old Testament than they are in the New Testament, Jesus does mention ashes as well. In Matthew and in Luke, when Jesus pronounces woes to unrepentant cities, saying that they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. In this context, ashes appear primarily under those themes of mourning and repentance, rather than the other themes of mortality. So where then do we get this service of Ash Wednesday? Jesus obviously did not celebrate the service of Ash Wednesday with his disciples, so we'll figure that out next.